Okay, today we're going to talk about subtraction and borrowing. Now, I think you know what subtraction is. It would be like if I had 8 things and I took 4 of them away, I would have 4 things left over. So if I had 8 cookies, you took 4 of my cookies like a cookie thief that you are, I would only have 4 cookies left, which is barely enough to get fat on. So I'd be a little irritated, but I would still let you eat my cookies. But that's what subtraction is. You've got a group of things, and you're going to take some of that group of things away, and you're going to figure out how much you have left over. Borrowing is a little bit different, but let's just start with a basic subtraction problem. Now these numbers are 3-digit numbers because they have 1, 2, 3 digits to them. Now that might be a little bit bigger than what you're used to using, but the good news is it's not any harder than doing a simple single-digit subtraction just like we just did. 8 minus 4 is 4. It is not any harder than that. And here's why. Every time you do an addition or subtraction problem that's set up like this, where you got one number on top and you subtract, and you got another number, then you got this line right here. You always work in columns. Always, 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 whether it's addition or subtraction. Now it'll change when you do multiplication and division, but for now we're just doing addition and subtraction. So anytime you see it lined up like this, we're always going to work it one column at a time. And you're always going to start with the column all the way to the right-hand side. You always start with that column. So with that being said, that means we're going to start this problem just looking at this column right here that has the 6 minus 4. I'm not even going to look at those other columns yet. I'm only going to work one column at a time, and it's always going to start with the one furthest to the right. So the furthest to the right says 6 minus 4. So I think about it like this. If I have 6 cookies, you took 4 away, how many would I have left? I would have 2. So I would write the answer down there. Now I'm moving on to the middle column. So I'm going to ignore this column and this column. I'm only looking at the middle column right now. I'm not even looking at the other ones. I'm just going to completely ignore them like they were some annoying person in the mall that I didn't want to see. I'm not even going to look their way. I'm only going to focus on the middle column. That one says 3 minus 2. Well, let's think about cookies again. I have 3 cookies. You take 2 away. I'm going to have 1 left. And now we're on to the very last column. So again, we're going to ignore the 2 we've already done. We're only going to focus on this column now. And this one says 2 minus 1. Cookie again. I have 2 cookies. You took 1 away. I have 1 left. That's basic subtraction. And we did it one column at a time, starting all the way on the right and working our way back this direction. We do one column at a time, and it's never any harder than that with one exception. Sometimes, so in other words, let me recap on here though. 236 minus 124 equals 112. And I didn't have to really subtract any big numbers. They were already there. Now I could have a whole long string of numbers that goes all the way over here, and you know what? I would still subtract things one column at a time. That would never change. That one's pretty easy. But what if I have to borrow? Okay, I'm still going to go with the same premise here. We're still going to say I'm going to start with this column first and work my way that way. So that hasn't changed, but look what has changed. Now the number that's on the top is a 6, but the number that's on the bottom is bigger than the number that's on the top. So now you start to go, okay, well if I'm thinking about cookies and I have 6 cookies and you want to take 7 of them, you greedy cookie grubber, I can't do that because I don't even have 7 to give you, do I? I don't. So I've got to do what's called borrowing. And what that means is I kind of look at these guys up on the top up here, these guys, Mr. 2, Mr. 3, and Mr. 6. I kind of look at those guys as if they're next door neighbors. Here's Mr. 6's house, here's Mr. 3's house in the middle, and here's Mr. 2's house. They live right next to each other. Well, number 6 needs to have at least 7 cookies so he can give them to you. But he only has 6. So he's going to come over here and talk to Mr. 3, and he's going to ask very nicely, Mr. 3, can I borrow some cookies from you so that I can give Rihanna some cookies? And he's going to always very nicely say yes. So he is going to give you one set of his cookies. That is going to change him, okay? He is now not going to be Mr. 3 Cookie House. He just gave you some cookies. So now he is, guess what? he is Mr. Two Cookie House. And you, though, he gave you some cookies. Now, you might think he only gave you one cookie, but he didn't. He actually gave you 10 cookies because each of these columns, this one, and this one, and this one, represent different amounts. And what I mean by that is this first column here represents ones. The second column here represents tens. And the third column here represents hundreds. I could write the word. So what has happened is this Mr. 3 that was in the middle that's now Mr. 2, he let Mr. 1 borrow some of his stuff, and he had to give it to him in groups of 10. So even though we only went down 1, he actually gave Mr. 1 10 cookies. So now, 6 plus 10, now we actually have 16. And so the way that I would write that, if I were you, let me go back. When I would be writing it, is I would write it like this. So we've got 6. We had to borrow from Mr. 3, so I would write a line through 3, and I would bring him down to 2 because now there's only 2 of him. And since he let me borrow 10, I'm going to add a 1 right here. I'm going to do a better one than that. That was terrible and embarrassing. And now, as you can see, if I'm only focusing on this last column over here, now I have a completely different looking subtraction problem. Now I have 16 minus 7. 16 minus 7. So if I had 16 cookies, I could definitely give you 7, and I would have 9 left over. Now that's the part that you just have to remember. You got to remember your addition facts and your subtraction facts. There's not much really I can do to help you remember those other than maybe you want to get some flashcards and just go over them every day. And sooner or later, probably more sooner rather than later because it doesn't take long, you will start to just remember. And so when I say to you, Rihanna, what's 16 minus 7? You'll be able to just tell me, oh, that's 9, right off the bat. Okay, but for right now, this is how we would write that because we borrowed. Okay, so that's how we wrote that. We borrowed 1 from the 3, so it went down to 2, and that 1 went over there in front of the 6. Okay, so now I have one piece of my puzzle, but I'm still missing this piece and this piece. So now I'm going to ignore this. I'm going to focus just on this column now. And now I have a new number. I have 2 subtract 2. So if I had 2 cookies and you took both of them, which would be really rude, but if you did, I would have no cookies left over. And if I had 2 over here, now we're on this column, if I had 2 over here and you took 1, I would have 1. That is how you borrow. So anytime when you see one of these problems and one of the numbers on the top row is smaller than one of the numbers on the bottom row, you know that you're going to have to borrow. You may not know exactly which column you're going to have to borrow from yet, but you can know you're going to have to borrow. So 236 minus 127 equals 109. I'll give you one more example of this. I have 122 minus 45. Now I'm going to go ahead and divide this into columns so that I don't get confused, and I'm only going to work on one column at a time. But right off the bat, I should notice something. The top row has 2 numbers, the 2 and this 2, and both of these numbers in these columns are smaller than the number beneath them. Anytime you see numbers on the top that are smaller than the numbers beneath, you know you're going to have to borrow. So let's go ahead and check this out. Let's focus only on the far right column. I have 2 cookies, and you're trying to take 5 of them. I can't give you 5 cookies if I only have 2. So Mr. 2 has got to talk to his neighbor and borrow. And his neighbor's always going to let him do that. So I'm going to scratch through him. He's going to give one of himself away. Now he's just got one of himself. And that other one went right here. So now I have a different scenario. I have 12 minus 5. And once you've memorized your subtraction tables, you would know 12 minus 5 is 7. So if I have 12 cookies, now I can finish this problem. 12 cookies, you took 5 of them. I've got plenty left over, 7. So now we just look at the middle column. Middle column now, I have a new number I'm dealing with. I've got a 1. Middle column says 1 minus 4. Uh-oh. Now what do? I have only one cookie and you want 4. So guess what? This guy is going to have to borrow from this guy now. Okay? So this guy, Mr. 1 here, he, being the generous man that he is, even though there's only one of him, he is going to go ahead and move over to here. Okay? So what he's going to do is he's going to give himself up. So we're going to cross him out. He's going to become nothing, and he's going to give himself over here. So there he showed up. Now I have this scenario. I have this column only, and it's 11 minus 4. 7. But now I come to my third column, and it looks like it's going to be a problem at first glance because I don't have anything left. But that's not a problem because there's nothing over here for me to subtract. It's all by itself. So even though there's none of me over here, that's okay. I can write a 0 if I want to, but you could just leave it blank also. Because what this is now telling us is that 122 minus 45 is 77. We have our answer. And that's how we did it. We had to borrow. So borrowing is something you're just going to have to get used to doing. So whenever you have your problem, 100 minus 50, it's the only other example I want to show you. We have numbers that are smaller on top than they are underneath. How are we going to do that? We've got to borrow. We're going to divide ourselves into columns. This first column says 0 minus 0. That's a no-brainer. If I don't have anything and you don't take anything away from it, it's a 0. But now we're left with this middle column. I have no cookies and you want to take 5. Well, Mr. No Cookies is going to talk to his neighbor. His neighbor's always going to be generous and nice. He's going to give himself up. But when he gives him one of his cookies, he's not going to have any cookies left. But he is going to give it to his buddy. So we've got 1, 0, which is 10, minus 5, which is 5. 100 minus 50 is 50. So all you need to remember when you're subtracting 3-digit numbers, or any digit numbers for that matter, if you have these numbers and you're subtracting these numbers, if you end up, you're always going to go with this column first, all the way to the right first, and if you ever end up having to borrow, let's say this was a 7, let's say the problem looked like this. If you ever have to borrow, because here I have 3, I'm trying to take away 4, if you ever have to borrow, you scratch through its neighbor, lower it by 1, give him the 1. Then you solve this one again, 13 minus 4, 9. Here we have it again. Let me get rid of some of those things. Then we move to the second column. I have 2 minus 3. Well, I can't do that because I only have 2, so I'm going to borrow again. I'm going to lower this one by 1 and give the 1 over here to this guy. Then I have 12 minus 3. It's going to be 9. Now I'm left with this third column here, which is 4 minus 2. That's going to be 2. So 533 minus 234 is 299. Go through that video a few times if I went too fast, just to kind of slow it down and see, make sure that you understand how to borrow. But please know that actual borrowing and subtraction isn't any different than doing one number minus one number at a time. Sometimes you'll have to borrow from your neighbor, but otherwise it's just one simple number subtracted by another simple number every single time. I hope that helped a little bit. Good luck, kiddo.